Recording. So when I'm starting a new project, I always create a folder to put the files into that project. This makes sure that I don't lose stuff as I'm working on the project. A lot of times, if you don't organize your files from the beginning, you'll lose track of where things are, and then some image that you really wanted to use disappears. Or maybe you have a bunch of different versions of the same project, and you lose the one that has the most recent version. So I always try to make sure that I really know where everything is and I have everything saved on my computer in a place that's easy to find. So to do that, I'm just going to click on my desktop and I'm going to hit Command N. Or wait, no, that just opens a new window. I'm going to hit Command Shift N. That creates a new folder. Okay, I'll do that again. So the keyboard command is Command Shift N, but I can also go to, if I'm in the Finder, I can go to File and go to New Folder. I'm going to call this MMP 100. So this is actually not the folder for my project. This is my folder for the whole class. So normally I'll have a folder for each class that I teach, and I'll have all the projects in that folder separately. So now I have my MMP 100 folder, and if I double click on that, it opens up this window in the Finder. There's a couple things that I'll point out about the Finder that are useful. One thing is if I go to View and I go down to Show Path Bar, this adds this little thing at the bottom that actually shows me where I am on my computer. So if you don't see that, you may be in the wrong folder. You may be in a folder that has the same name but is in a different place. And our computer is really just like basically a structure with different folders for our different files. The folders are not like real. You know, they don't have like a physical attribute. They're just properties that we assign to our files to make them organized. So if I click on like Macintosh HD, you can see that my computer organizes all these different sections. It has my applications in one folder, my library in another folder, system stuff in this folder, and then users is right here. And most of the time, we're inside the users folder. So if I go into the users folder, you can see these are all the different professors that teach in this class. I recognize most of these people's names, but I don't have access to their folders. So like if I want to go to Chris Stein's folder, see how it has these red things? I can't actually go in here. I can go into his public folder, but I'm not going to do that right now. But my folder is right here. And it looks like a house because I'm logged in as me. Okay, so if I go into my folder, now I can actually access this stuff. And so now we see this further organization on the computer. We have our desktop, which is what we see on the desktop. We have our documents, downloads, some other stuff. Pretty much all I use is the desktop and the downloads. Some people like to use their documents folder. I usually don't use it because I like to be able to see my folders on the desktop. So I pretty much only use desktop and downloads. And they're in this favorites section, so they're very easy to access if I want to go in between them. Okay, so on my desktop, here's my MMP 100. Another thing that can be useful is these buttons up here. If I click on this button, I'll see a list of my folders. If I click on this button, I'll see all my folders kind of lined up. And that's my favorite way to look at it because you'll see when I create a new folder, I can see all the different folders on the computer. So I'm going to make a new folder for my project inside MMP 100. And to do this, I'm going to go to File, New Folder, or I hold Command Shift and hit N. So I have a new folder. I'm going to call this Self-Portrait. And this is where I'm going to save my files on my computer. So again, the reason I like this view is I can see I'm in my desktop. I'm in my MMP 100 folder, I'm in my self-portrait folder. So I can see really easily where I am on the computer. As opposed to this view where it's just it's just one folder at a time, so I don't have any other information. Or this view, there's a list of files, but I don't have any files in here. This is the view that I prefer when I'm editing my projects. Okay. So I'll talk a little bit more about that type of stuff as I do more, but let's go over to Photoshop and create our project. So I'm going to go back to Photoshop. I'm going to close this thing I had. So when you open Photoshop, normally you're going to be on this screen. If it's the first time you've opened it, you may see some other screen that says like, do you want to do a tutorial or something like that? And for now, you can ignore that. You can always go back and do those if you want to. But the main thing that we want to do is create a new project. So we're going to go to New File. I'm just going to click New File here. And it's going to open a new window. So this new window is called a dialog window. It's going to disappear once we make the choice about what type of file we want to use. And it has some defaults for us. So if we're making something for the web, it has some suggestions. If we're making something for mobile, it has different suggestions. So I'm going to make something for the web, and I'm going to go with this web minimum. So I'm going to go with a little bit of a smaller project for now because we're going to be putting some images together. So I might want to, be able to scale them and move them around. So when I click on these different presets, it fills in different information here. And there's a couple things that we can change if we don't like the preset. We can change the number of pixels in terms of the width. You can actually change the unit. So if I click on this drop down, you can see the unit refers to like the measurements that we're using. So for making something on the web, it's digital. We're just working with pixels. But if we were making something that we were going to print out, like a poster or like a greeting card, we might want to use inches. For mostly American people use inches. If you're European or something, you might want to use centimeters. You might be more used to using centimeters for measurements or millimeters. If you're from the past, you might want to use like points or picas. These refer to like actual physical like printing press things that we're not going to use. We're making digital stuff, so we're going to stick with pixels. We're going to stick with 1024 width and 768 height. Orientation is if something's either wider or taller. So portrait is going to flip those, so it's taller than it is wide. And landscape is going to be wider than it is tall. Of course, you can make a square. The artboards option, I always turn this off because I've been using Photoshop for a really long time, and they didn't used to have these artboards, and I don't really find them that useful. It really doesn't matter if you have them on or not, but if I do stuff, I'll always turn this off. This resolution thing, we don't really have to worry about. You can ignore that because we're not printing anything in this class. Color mode, there we see our RGB color. There we see our level of quality is 8-bit. We're going to stick with 8-bit. We're not going to do anything too crazy, so we'll stick with 8-bit. We can say what we want the background to be. I'm just going to leave this at white. I don't really care. I'm going to ignore the advanced options. So this looks good. When I've got everything that I want, I'm going to click Create. And so we're going to see this blank white canvas. And depending on what you've done so far with Photoshop, you may see different stuff here. I'm not going to go over every single little detail of the interface today because it would take too long. But one thing that you can do to easily change the way Photoshop looks is if you go to Window and go to Workspace. You can see I have the default workspace, but I can actually move all this stuff around. So for example, if I took color, I could like put this over here if I was doing a lot of different stuff with color. If I wanted to do adjustments, maybe I would put that like down here. I can actually move all these windows into different parts of my interface, or I can just get rid of them. If I hit Control and click, I can close this, or I can close this entire group. I can minimize and maximize these windows. I can pull this out and just have it kind of float around outside of the whole interface. I can make all these adjustments to make Photoshop work for what I'm trying to do. But if I, at a certain point, want to go back to normal, I can go to Workspace and just say Reset. And it's just going to go back to what the default is. Photoshop has some built-in workspaces for us for different types of work. So like if we were working on photography, it has a slightly different version. If we were doing something with painting, you can see it brings up these different things. I'm going to go with Essentials. And if you make changes to this that you want to keep, so one thing that I often will do is I'll put my layers up here because we are going to talk a lot about layers, and so I want to make sure they're easily accessible. So I might put my layers up here and have two windows like this, And if I want to be able to get back to that, I can go to Windows and go to Workspace, and I can click New Workspace and say this is Owen's cool layer workspace, and click Save. And now if I quit Photoshop and come back later, I can go to Windows and I can go to Owen's cool layer workspace, and have my workspace back. Okay, so those are some basics with the interface. There's a lot of tools over here. We're going to go over a few of those today. We're not going to go over all of them. And then the layers is super important. The layers is how we add different images and different sources together. So we're going to go over that a little bit as well. But we want to put some stuff in here. So what I'm going to do, as I mentioned before, is I'm going to find some images from the web that I can composite together. So I'm going to make them look like they're in the same place. And that's one of the kind of fun things about Photoshop. Of course, AI could do that for me in 2 seconds, but since I'm a computer geek, I want to do it myself. So if I want some images to add into my project, I'm going to leave Photoshop for a second. I'm going to go back to Google Chrome, and let's just make a new window. And I'm just going to go to Google, and I'm going to search for some images. So I can kind of think about different things I might want to do. So for this project, I think what I'll do is I'll put some type of animal into some type of scene. So let's get a scene, let's get an environment first. I'll use a city. And if I want to make sure, I don't want Google to know my location, so I'm just going to click X here. So I can go to the Images tab in Google. I'm sure you guys have been here before. But remember earlier I talked about Creative Commons. I don't want to use images that are owned by somebody else, because if they see that I'm using their images, they might be mad and they might sue me. They probably won't, because we're in a educational environment. But if I wanted to like sell this cool composite that I'm about to make in the future, if I use somebody else's image, they would have grounds to sue me, and that would not be fun. So yeah. That's exactly what I'm going to show you. So it's actually really easy on Google. That's why I'm using Google. There's other ways to find it. But on Google, I just go to Tools, and there's this drop down for usage rights. And if I click Creative Commons licenses, notice how there's 2 types. There's Creative Commons and there's commercial and other. So commercial and other means that people are making stuff that you have to buy. Creative Commons means people are making stuff that's free to use. There's more rules when it comes to Creative Commons, and we'll talk about those rules a bit. But for now, that's going to help me find stuff a lot more easily if I go to Creative Commons. There's other stuff in here that's actually quite useful. Like I can look at the size. So I can say I want large, medium, or icon. And I can also look at the color. If I want like a specific color, I can choose different colors. I can also look for different types of work and different times for when it was posted. Okay, so I've got some cool images here. Let's see. I've got this like bird image. That's pretty cool. Maybe what I'll do is I'll give this bird a friend to hang out with. So I'm going to click on that image, and this is from Wikipedia. So Wikipedia is often where you'll find Creative Commons images. There's a few other websites that will come up when you look for Creative Commons stuff, like Pexels is one of them that you'll see a lot. Raw Pixel is another. For images, Flickr has a lot of Creative Commons. There's Flickr. So there's certain ones when you do this type of search, you'll start to see more often. Okay, so one thing I want to make sure is that this image has enough data in it. So when I hover over, notice right here it says 1812 by 1812. So that means 1812 pixels by 1812 pixels. That's not massive, but it's a pretty decent size, and it's bigger than the Photoshop file that I created. So when I import that image, it'll actually be larger than the canvas that I have. So that'll give me space to move it around. And of course, I can size it down. I can size it down and it'll keep the same level of quality, but if I size it up, it'll start to get blurry because the information will be stretched farther than what it originally was. Okay, so I'm going to click on this image. It's going to bring me over here to this birding in New York City site. And if I click on it again, different ones of these sites have different things that you kind of have to jump through, but eventually what I want to find is a download button. Okay, so there we see download. And then there's different sizes. So 1812 by 1812 is the biggest size. And so if I click on there, now we're seeing the actual image. The reason I know this is the actual image is because it has .jpeg. That's an image file extension. Yeah. That's another way that I could do it. There's different ways to do everything. I'm going through kind of the long way just so we see all those steps. But you could do that as well. I could just, so once I'm at the image here, oh, it's over here, I can control click or right click, and then I can click save image as. So that's another way to do it. But I want to look at the information first because there's other stuff here that's useful to know. So for example, there's different sizes. So I do want the biggest size, but it's good to know that there are other sizes that I could download. And then I can also find, there's a description, here's the author. So this is something that we're gonna wanna remember for later. When we use images like this, we're usually gonna cite the image when we publish our work. So that's something I wanna remember. And then here is the specific Creative Commons license. So there are different types of Creative Commons licenses. This one is a share alike 2.0. And it actually has a good description of it here. If I click on this link, it'll take me to the Creative Commons website, and this has the same description. But it has a description here, and so this is where it actually tells me the specific terms through which I can use the image. So I can share. This means I can copy, distribute, and transmit the work. I can remix, which is what I'm going to do. I'm going to add stuff to it under the following conditions. So this is what I have to do to follow the guidelines. Attribution means I have to say who made the image. So I have to remember this author's name. And then share alike means, this is actually a little bit more restrictive. Share alike means that if I use this image, I can't then add my own copyright that says if somebody uses my thing that I'm going to create, that they can't use it. Share alike means I have to apply the same license to anything that I distribute that uses this source image. So it's actually a little bit more restrictive than other licenses, which just say do whatever you want with this. So that's good to keep in mind. As I mentioned, since we're doing educational work, we don't really have to, I don't want anybody to think that you're actually going to get sued by anybody, because you're probably not going to. When you're doing educational work, you're pretty much safe from most things. But when you go into a professional context, you are going to be required to understand these things. So that's why we go over them. Anyway, so now I understand everything that I need to about this image. And I can click download to download all the sizes. I can click here, and this brings me to the image file itself. Or, of course, I can right-click on here and go to Save Image As. One thing that we do have to be careful is all of those things are going to put my image in different places. So let's see what happens. So if I click Save Image As, it's going to bring up this drop-down. This is super important. This says it's going to go to my Downloads folder. That's fine. I can always move it from my Downloads folder somewhere else, but I can actually tell it to go somewhere else if I want to. I can click on this little arrow, and I can go to my desktop, go to MMP 100, go to Self-Portrait, and I can put it in that folder that I just created. So that way I won't lose the image. It has a really long name, so I'm just going to rename it and just call it Pigeon City. And I'm going to hit enter to save it. And now it's on my computer. If I go back to the desktop, so here's my MMP 100 folder, here's Self-Portrait, here's that image. Okay. So if I save it in a different way, I may end up with a different result. So if I'm over here, so this is .jpeg, I could actually just drag this onto my computer since I just have the JPEG. So I could drag this, whoops. Oh, where'd it go? So I could open my Finder over here, and I could drag the image and then use Command Tab to go back to the Finder and throw it into there. So I could drag it onto my computer. I could also drag it onto the desktop. I can even probably drag it directly into Photoshop. Like if I drag this and go to Photoshop, it'll probably open up, but it'll probably make a new window, which is not what I want. Yeah. So there's a few different ways I can do that, but ultimately what I want to do is just put it into Photoshop. So I've got my one image. Since I'm already on my browser, I'm going to get my second image to use in my composite before I go over to Photoshop. So I'm going to go to Google again. This time I'm going to give my bird guy a little friend. So I'm going to find a lizard to put next to him. So I'll go to Images, go to Tools, go to Usage Rights, Creative Commons. And I need to find a lizard that kind of looks like it could be sitting next to the bird, like right here. Let's see. This one I think will work. Okay, so notice this image is huge. This image is 2600 pixels by 1600 pixels. It's a very large image. I don't really need an image that big. So if I click here, I can use a smaller version. I don't want to go like tiny, but I can probably do like this one, and that's going to be plenty of resolution. So that one looks good. I can also hit Command S to save this once I have the image open, and I'll just call this lizard and save. And so now I have my lizard.jpg and pigeoncity.jpg. JPEG is the file standard for a lot of images and photos. I actually forget what it stands for. Let's look it up. Stands for Joint Photographic Experts Group. It's pretty standard. There's new standards that are coming along, but they've had a hard time making headway because the standards that have already existed are so entrenched. We're so used to them that people don't really want to move on. But there are new standards besides JPEG that are starting to come out. Anyway, a lot of the images that we'll use for this project are going to be JPEGs. Sometimes it's just .jpg. Sometimes it's JPEG, JPEG. Sometimes it's capitalized too, but it's all the same type of thing. Okay, so now I want to add these into my Photoshop project. So I'm going to go back to Photoshop. One thing that I use a lot on a Mac is Command Tab. When I hit Command Tab, it brings up the programs that I have open. And then if I hold Command down and I hit Tab again, I can cycle through these programs. And if I hit it really quickly, I can cycle back and forth. Basically what's happening is I'm going like this and then going like this. But if I do it really fast, you don't even see the thing come up. So if you see me switching really fast between softwares or applications, that's usually what I'm doing. Okay, so now I have to get these images on here. So there's a couple ways I can do it. One, I can drag. So I can just drag this and drop it here. And it's going to give me these like blue dots, and I have to say where I want it to go before I am done. So what I'm going to do is just drag this out to here and drag this guy down to here. And you can see how big the image is. I'm not going as big as that other version, so I should be fine resolution-wise, but I'll show you guys what it looks like if I go too far. So once I'm happy with how it looks, I can also move it around. And then if I get close to the edges, it'll sort of snap to the edges. That's when it moves a little bit to kind of like go to that edge. And then I can resize it a bit and then try it again. And once I've got what I want, I just hit enter and that blue thing goes away. That thing is called a transformation. It transforms the size of the image. If I go to edit and go to, where is it? Transform. You can see the different types of transformations, scale, rotate, etc. But if I just hit free transform, I'll see that blue box again. And I can also like rotate and do different stuff, but I'm not going to do that right now. So I'll hit enter. If I want to zoom in and zoom out, I can hit Command and then hit minus to zoom out and plus to zoom in. So I can zoom in and out. And if I want to move the image around, let's say I zoom in a lot, I can hit spacebar and my mouse will turn into a hand and I can move the image around using the hand. So I'm not actually moving the image itself, but I'm moving the canvas that I'm editing. If I want to move the image itself, I use the move tool. So I can move this image around on the canvas. So that moves where the image is on the canvas. If I hit spacebar, I can move the canvas itself. You can see over here in my layers section, when I added this image, it created a new layer. And I can turn that layer on and off using this little eyeball. And I can also lock the layer. So if I lock the layer, now I can't move the layer. I can't make changes to it. So I can unlock the layer by clicking the lock again. I also have this background which is locked by default, but I can unlock it if I want to change the background. Okay, so now I'm going to add another image on top. I can drag and drop again, but another way that I can add an image is I can go to File and go to Import and go to Image from Device. Oh no, this is not what I want. I don't have a scanner. Wait, what do I do? Import. Okay, that's not what I want. Where is import? Okay, maybe I just hit Command I? No. Okay, if I can't find what I'm looking for, I can go to Help and then type in Search, and I want to import. Maybe they got rid of import. Let's see. Image. File. Maybe they got rid of this because people don't use it anymore. I feel like you used to be able to do this. Oh wait, okay, here we go. Place embedded. Okay, so I think I have to say place embedded. I think they changed the name of that. Here's my lizard place. There we go. Okay, so it's not import anymore, it's place embedded. Okay, so now I have the same thing with my lizard. I can move him around. I didn't realize the tail was cropped off, so that's something we're gonna have to make sure that the tail is there. But so now I'm just gonna make my lizard smaller so he fits next to the bird. You don't have to do this perfectly the first time because you can always adjust it later. But I'm just gonna put the lizard down here next to the bird and hit enter. So now I just want to zoom in on my lizard, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to composite my lizard into my bird image. So I'm almost done. I just have one little thing left to do. Of course, there's a lot of things that I haven't covered yet. You guys can play around with different stuff in class, and I'll go over more stuff next week. But just to get the basics here, we want to get this lizard into this image. And so what we need to do, there's different terms for this. One term is background removal. We're going to remove the background of the lizard image to make it look like the lizard is part of my background bird image. So this square background. So there's a lot of different ways to do this, but now with AI, it's pretty easy to do. There's a built-in tool that Photoshop has that makes this pretty easy right here. It's called the object selection tool. Okay, so this isn't AI like Midjourney or whatever, where it just completely generates a new image. But this is based on AI because it knows like what kind of like different objects are. In the past, what we used to have to do is we actually had to draw an outline around the thing that we wanted to get rid of, and then we would add a mask. And that took a lot of time, but now we can just use the object selection tool, and it will almost always do this pretty well. So I'm going to select my lizard. I'm just going to draw on top of it. And it's going to think for a little while, and there we go. Actually, it didn't really do that well because it's missing the arms and the legs. So we actually will get to see when the AI doesn't do it perfectly, that gives us a chance to go in and use the tools a little bit. And so this will be a good example to show you guys if your selection isn't perfect the first time, we can actually edit the selection. Okay, so this blue selection, let's try it one more time. Maybe we'll get a better version. So I'm gonna select a larger area. And okay. Oh, I have to reset it. Okay, so it has, once I make the selection, you can see these like, this is called the marching ants. It's this little outline of the white and black line, but I don't want that anymore. This is called a selection. It's when you make a selection in your canvas. And so everything having to do with this is under the select menu. But what I want to actually do is get rid of this and try it again. So I'm going to go to select and do deselect. So that'll get rid of that marching lines thing. And that I can also do reselect if I want to bring it back, or I can just hit Command D to deselect. Okay, I'm going to try this again. So I'm going to do this. No, it's making the same one. Okay, how do I reset this? It's not letting me. Let's try this. Oh, okay, so it's already decided what it thinks the different objects are. And anyway, so I'm going to go with the lizard. So I'm going to click on this. That'll give me the selection, but you can see it didn't get the full lizard, so I'm going to have to edit this. And that's actually good because that's something I would have showed you guys how to do anyway. So once I've got the selection I want, the way that I get rid of the background is I go down here. So this is something that is often easy to miss because it's just this little button at the bottom of my layers panel. But there's this little button here that looks like a flag with a circle in the middle. This is a layer mask. If I click on that, you see what happens. The background goes away. So this mask basically is like a 2D image that's black and white. And if something's black, that means don't show it. If something's white, that means do show it. And so it's making a mask based on the selection that we got from our quick object, but we're going to have to edit it to add the lizard feedback. So if I double click on the mask, this dialog comes up and says, what would you like double clicking on your layer mask to do? Actually, this is just a setting. I want it to do enter selected mask. So when I enter selected mask, this part is the part that's a little challenging. So there's a couple things that we need to set first. So we want to see the original mask, and we want to be able to see it pretty well. So you can see I can take out this part of the mask, but I can choose how it looks with this drop down. So what I'm going to do is this red overlay. This shows us the part that's being taken out of the image. And so we can add stuff back into it. So if I zoom in a little bit, and I can still hit spacebar to move over, you can see that our leg is kind of red. So the leg is not part of the mask. So we need to add that part. So I'm going to turn the opacity, actually it's pretty good right there, about 50. I can also change the color of this. If I'm editing a red image, this obviously isn't going to work. So I could change it to blue or green or whatever. But since the lizard is, not red, then red works pretty well for this. And now I'm going to actually use my mouse. This isn't going to be perfect, but it's a good example of what we can do. I can go to the refine mode, and I can either say color aware or object aware. I'm going to go with object aware. And then edge detection is fine. I'll set these settings later, but right now I need to add to my mask. So I have this brush over here, and you can see there's a couple different options, but basically if this is a plus, it's going to add to the mask, although it's not letting me do that. Let's go to brush. Okay, I have to switch to brush. No, okay, something. Actually, maybe I shouldn't have set this. Okay, now I don't know why it's not working. This one? No, it should be. I'm just going to cancel and try it again. Okay, so I'm going into the mask, so I double click to go into the mask. I'm going to change the view to overlay. And then, there we go. I don't know what happened, but now it's working. Okay. So I'm going to make my brush size a little bit smaller because those legs are pretty small. And so now if I have plus, it actually takes away from the mask, so it adds to the image. And if I have minus, so if I hold the Alt Option key, then it adds red, so I can add stuff into the mask. So I'm gonna undo. It's not letting me undo. Whoops. Okay. Let's go back in here. Okay. So now what I want to do is just get these legs in here. So I'm just going to paint these legs into my mask. Okay, that's pretty good. I'm actually going to do size 1 because the legs are really small. And actually, I had scaled down the lizard quite a bit. So if I wanted to have more control over this, I might scale the lizard back up and edit the mask and then scale it down again. Anyway, that looks good enough. I'm going to paint in this little leg down here and this little foot. Okay, I went a little too far, so I'm going to paint the red back here. And then there's a foot here that kind of does actually just blend in with the like rock that he's sitting on. So again, this doesn't have to be perfect. If I was like doing this for like a magazine, I would spend a lot more time on this. But just for the demo, I'm just going to add a little bit more red back in. And then I have the little bit of the foot over here that I'm going to paint on. Okay. So that looks okay. It doesn't look perfect, but it looks good enough. Actually, there's some, I want to take this bit out down here. Okay, it looks good enough. And now if I go back to onion skin, I can turn the transparency all the way up and see what that looks like. This foot I think is maybe not a foot, but whatever, I'm going to leave it for now. And then I have a couple other settings that I can do to make this look better or worse depending on which way I go. But so one of those settings is smoothing. So smoothing kind of changes the edge, so you can see it's moving the edge of the mask in and out. Then feathering kind of fades a little bit. It might be good to add a little feather. And then you can shift the edge. And I'll often shift the edge in just a little bit just to get rid of any gross outlines. And I might feather just a teeny bit. Hit OK. And now we've got our lizard. Okay, so it's not perfect, but you can see the basic idea. And so now we've got this lizard next to our bird. So that's how we do compositing. One thing that you'll notice is that the lizard, the coloring of the lizard is very different than the bird. So even though we've removed the background, it still doesn't look like they're part of the same photo. So that's actually what we're going to cover next time, is how do I change the color, different qualities of the color to match the color of the original photo. We're going to do that next time. For now, we're just going to focus on the compositing. Okay. I'm looking at the lizard now, and I'm wondering if my mask maybe needs... No, I think the parts of the lizard's skin just look a lot like the rocks that they're sitting on. But, you know, lizards are good at camouflage, so I guess that kind of makes sense. It looks like almost exactly the same. Anyway, that's how we do compositing. There's a lot of other ways to do it. There's other different things that we can do, but I'm going to stop there so you guys will have some class time to actually work on this on your own. I'm going to save this. I'm not going to go over exporting and publishing quite yet. We'll do that a little bit later, but I do want to go over saving the file. So when I hit Command S, it's going to save my files, and it's going to say save to Creative Cloud. When you have a Creative Cloud account, you get like a little bit of storage space. And if you guys want to use the Creative Cloud so that you can open this in other places, that's a good idea. You're welcome to do that. I don't like using the Creative Cloud because I don't like not knowing exactly where my files are. So what I'm usually going to do is click on my computer. Again, feel free to use the Creative Cloud if you want to. I'm going to click on my computer. It's going to try to tell me to use the cloud. I'm going to say that's fine. And now what I want to show is I'm creating a different type of file than the images that I downloaded. Images are literally just colors of pixels. That's the only information that's stored. What we just made is a Photoshop file. It is going to preserve our layers and the other editing things that we did. And so when we create a Photoshop file, that's like our edit file. It's almost like if you think about like a film. When you make a film, you shoot lots of different scenes and then you edit them together, right? So you keep the original film, but when you distribute the finished edited film to movie theaters, you don't send them everything that you shot, you just send them the finished product. So that's something we'll go over later, is the difference between, or how to export those images. But for now, we just have to remember that a PSD file is a Photoshop file. It's different than our image files, and we need to make sure to save that if we want to go back and edit it later. Because our images files do not save things like the layers and the mask that we created. Okay, so I'm going to call this file self-portrait.psd. So that's the Photoshop file. And I'm going to save it, click OK. And I'll show you what I mean real quick. So if I quit Photoshop, and I'm going to get rid of this part, and I'll minimize this for a second. So here's my self-portrait project now. I have 3 files. I have my original lizard JPEG, and if I open that, all it is just pixel data. It's only ever going to be this pixel information. But if I open up my self-portrait image, it's going to open up Photoshop again, and you'll see that it still has the same layers, and it still has this mask. So I can still make changes to it. I can go in here to the mask and I can edit it all over again. So the Photoshop file I really need to make sure to save, because that's how I can make edits to my project again in the future. So now you should have at least 2 images. You may have more images that you add in there, but you should have at least 2 images and then your PSD file. You'll notice that the PSD file is usually probably bigger. So it's 8.6 megabytes versus the images. This one's only 2.7, and this one is only 192 kilobytes, which is a kilobyte is much smaller than a megabyte. The Photoshop file actually has all of that image data plus the stuff that we added, so it's a much bigger file, 8.6 megabytes. Okay, so that's everything I want to cover for our first Photoshop lesson. I'm going to stop the video here.